Thank you very much, and thank you so much for coming here tonight. So, tonight I come with some bad news and with some good news. The bad news is that those of us who care about freedom, we are on our own. We haven't got ideological allies. Most of us already know that the left couldn't care less about freedom, so most of us don't consider them allies. But tonight I want to tell you that the same happens with the right. The right also cannot be an ally, and the right also cannot be someone with whom we're on the same team. Then what are the good news? The good news is that understanding this, understanding that we're not on the same team with what we call the right in the defense of liberty, can offer a moment of clarity. Because there have been many people whom for too long have thought that Trump is a friend, or that people like Viktor Orban are actually freedom fighters. And for these people, hopefully, the last few years have been a wake-up call. Because it's quite important to know who your allies are. And of course, this doesn't mean that on particular topics we cannot cooperate with good people from the left and from the right. For example, with the left we might find ourselves quite often on the same page on issues such as abortion, or on issues such as the legalization of drugs. I saw a t-shirt there saying ending the drug war. And also with the right, we can find ourselves on the same barricades, for example, in favor of decriminalizing fracking or decriminalizing nuclear energy. But still, this wouldn't mean that we're on the same team. Now, before I go on to explain why I think that the right is not an ally, just let me clarify something about what do we mean by, quote, the right. Because of the term, it's so vague. If you think about it, technically, Hitler is on the right. And at the same time, Milton Friedman is also, quote, on the right. Or Margaret Thatcher is considered the right, and Giorgia Meloni is right. Or Julius Evola and Ayn Rand are both considered, quote, the right. So what do I mean when I say the right? Put very simply, I mean people who understand themselves as being on the same group, on the same tribe, with other people who consider themselves right. So I wouldn't call myself a right, but today I'll talk about people who do consider themselves, quote, the right. So, what is then the right today? There are mostly three options when it comes to the right. Three different types of right. And I claim that all of them are absolutely incapable of defending freedom. The first type of right is the respectable. No problem. What were we saying? The first type of right is the respectable right. This right would tell us, you people are a minority, but we are the many. We are the people who win elections. They will say, we are the people who are a big umbrella. And we are the people who can make small changes, but changes that are going to have a direct effect in your life. We're going to cut your taxes by 2%. Now, that's not bad. These are the right that, for example, is the Tory party in the UK. It is the party that has committed itself to implementing the, quote, net zero policy. It is the right that is passing, quote, hate speech laws, which in simple terms means literally censorship. If you say something which I don't like, the police is going to knock on your door. It is the right that has invited Greta Thunberg in the British Parliament to lecture politicians about how big business is evil and is destroying the environment. Not to mention that it is the right that locked us down in a way that it's too fresh to the memory, you don't need me to remind you. But also, it is the right that, by coincidence, I would say, some months ago, and again I'll give you the example of the UK, found itself being led for the first time in a generation by two people who consider themselves, quote, neoliberals or free marketeers. Remember Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister in the UK. And they dared to whisper something about deregulation. They dared to whisper something about cutting taxes. How long did they last? 38 days, the Finance Minister, 45 days, the Prime Minister. Who overthrew them? Not the left, the party itself. So this is the right, these are the conservatives who then came to apologize to the people and say, sorry, we will never again dare to cut the taxes of the rich, and we promise to you that we're not, quote, market fundamentalists. Now, I assume you don't need me to explain to you why this right is no ally and they're completely hopeless in defending freedom. But there's also a second type of right. They're quite proud in the fact that they're more interesting, more edgy than the third type of right. They're more fun. They inspire more enthusiasm. Although the bar is very low if you compete with a George Bush or a David Cameron. And this is the Trumpite right. This is the so-called dissident right. Now, is this right better at defending freedom? Well, let's see their track record. They're the right that they still haven't reached the intellectual maturity of the 18th century and of reading Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations, because they believe that when you engage in free trade, it's win-lose. They believe that if I sell you this, one of us is going to be a loser. They're the right who think that if a private company, Twitter, tells me, Nikos, I don't want you on my digital premises, so leave, they consider this censorship. And they think that the state should do something about it. Also, they're the right that they're quite proud to tell us that at the state level, they're passing legislation so that private companies will not do workshops on critical race theory and diversity. This is the Trumpian right. So what do they stand for? What is their philosophy? Their philosophy is very simple. They're tribalists. What do I mean with that? The way they view the world is that what unites us, in the quote right, is how much we hate the left. Therefore, everything we do is going to have as its standard how to, quote, own the libs, as they call it, or how to destroy the left or whatever. And notice how this literally makes them stupid. Why are conservatives in the US and also in places in Europe so hostile to the vaccines? Is it because they read the reports and they say, my conclusion is that these vaccines don't work or something? No. I'm old enough to remember that when Trump was president, that part, the Trumpian right, was enthusiastic about the vaccines. They would come so quickly, and Trump is the best thing that has happened to us because he's going to give us the vaccines so fast. Biden becomes president, Trump loses the election. What is now their take on the vaccines? It's a scheme by Big Pharma and Dr. Fauci, who is the worst person on earth, to poison us or whatever. This is literally the way to make us communist China. Have you noticed how many conservatives and how many on the right are Putin's useful idiots? Why? Because the only way they can view this conflict, the conflict in Ukraine, is to say, the people I hate, the woke, the social justice warriors, however they call them, the people I hate like Zelensky. What does this tell me? It tells me that Putin must be the good guy. Because Putin hates the woke. Putin hates my enemy, therefore the only way I can process this is that probably Putin is not such a bad guy. Because whatever my enemies say must be wrong. Again, this right is no ally in the battle of freedom. But there is a third type of right, a new type of right, which is way more serious, intellectually serious, than the Trump seat posters, and therefore I would say way more dangerous. It is a right that is consciously and philosophically opposed to freedom. The Trumpian right is not consciously and philosophically opposed to anything because they don't stand for anything. But this type of right, they do. And I'm talking about a new movement in the United States and in Europe, which is called the National Conservatives. Have you heard about them? If you haven't, you will hear about them soon, because there's a very good chance that the next US president is going to be someone who identifies himself as National Conservatives. And I talk about the current governor of Florida, DeSantis. So who are these National Conservatives? They're mostly a group of intellectuals who have, though, quite an appeal in big figures in the American and in the European right. For example, Peter Thiel, the entrepreneur, is one of their main supporters. And what does this right stand for? Well, they start with one premise. They say that the biggest mistake that the conservative movement has done in the last century is that they've been fellow travelers with liberals, with classical liberals. So they're telling you to your face, we don't want you. They're telling you to your face that the fact that we met each other when we fought communism during Cold War, that was an affair that should never have happened. And what is their problem with liberalism? And liberalism, I mean in the European sense, classical liberalism. The problem with liberalism is that liberalism cannot conserve, cannot keep intact the traditions and the customs of Western societies. And they're true. They're correct. Liberalism is about constant change. But this is not what they want. So their standards, the way they evaluate policies, philosophies, ideas, is not, does it give individuals as much liberty so as to live their life? Their standard is, does this set of ideas or policies help us to preserve, to conserve what we have? If not, it's not good for us. These national conservatives are very uncomfortable with the ideas of individualism. Because think about it. For them, the basis of society, the building block of society, is not the individual. It is, they start from the family, and then they say it's family, clan, tribe, nation. So they're proud collectivists. Proud collectivists. And to a collectivist, individual freedom is a problem. Because, for example, if your country calls you to arms, if your country wants you to go and fight, but then you say, well, I don't consent, they would say, tough luck. Your consent is not yours to give. You are part of a bigger group, and your group now wants you to go and fight. They're also very uncomfortable with the idea of economic freedom. Because what does economic freedom do to stability and tradition? It destroys it. And again, they're right on that. what does economic freedom do to coffee shops like this one, which, by the way, I love it? It brings more Starbucks. Again, for a national conservative, this is no good. And you tell them, but people voluntarily go to Starbucks. And they say, it doesn't matter. It destroys the basis of communities. What if your economic interest as a capitalist tells you, I want to ship my factory to Bangladesh? Again, the National Conservative will say, no, you shouldn't be allowed to do this. Because what is this going to do to your community? And also, in this nationalist frame, they also add religious morality. So for national conservatives, either we have the same moral code which comes from God that binds us, otherwise we live in a Tower of Babel. Because who are you to think, if each one of us, they call it, if each one of us have their own morality, we're all playing God. And if we're all playing God, it's chaos, it's anarchy. What would a world ruled by religious morality look like? If you're not anymore happy in your marriage, tough luck. You gave a promise in front of God, now you stick to it. You want to marry a man, if you're a man, or you want to have a sexual partner of the same sex, best case we can do, we can allow you to do it privately. What does this right have to say about free speech? In theory, it's okay, but of course not about things like obscenities or pornography. So they're like their intellectual cousins of the left. The left, everyone, I haven't met a single leftist who says free speech is wrong. But they always adjust a but at the end. Free speech is okay, but no hate speech. Free speech is okay, but not speech that, offends transgender people. Equally, the National Conservatives say free speech is okay, but nothing that offends religion. So, where does your freedom fit in their scheme? Your freedom as individuals ends where the religious morality or where their idea about the, quote, interests of the community begin. So this right is perhaps the biggest threat to freedom. And unfortunately, this is the type of right that attracts more and more people. In Europe, their poster boy is Orban. And in the US, as I said, there's a good chance that the next US president will be a fan of this ideology. Rob DeSantis was the keynote speaker in the last National Conservative Conference. So why is the right so hostile then to freedom? To sum it up, two reasons. One is their religious morality. Because according to that religious morality, your aim in life is not your happiness. This is considered selfish. This is considered materialistic. This is considered hostile to that worldview. But if your aim is not your happiness, then why do you need freedom? Why not be guided by someone who knows better what is good for you? And the second reason, as I said, is their collectivism. Again, if the important thing here is the cohesion and the progress of the nation, why do you need freedom? Someone has to express the will of the nation. So your freedom is, at best, a luxury, at best. And is this a new thing? Actually, no. The right has been like that throughout the biggest part of its history. And there was a great philosopher who unfortunately today is not as prominent as he should be, I'm talking about Ayn Rand, who more than 60 years ago she wrote an essay called Conservatism and Obituary, where she foresees all these things. She foresees that conservatives are absolutely incapable of standing up for freedom. Therefore, they stand up for these things like the American way of life. What's the American way of life? Okay, it's like having cool trucks and doing barbecues and having guns. But in principle, what does this mean? Or in Europe, we say, oh, we stand for the British values. I lived in the UK for 16 years. I have no idea what the British values are. Seriously. By the way, you can get this essay and all of her books for free if you're a student by clicking on this QR code. Speaking about the religious morality and freedom, do you know who was the first great implementer of the welfare state? Who is the father of the welfare state? Bismarck. And do you know how Bismarck called by the way, next time you have a discussion with your leftist friends who think that the welfare state is the most leftist thing, give them this interesting kind of pub quiz information. The first founder of the welfare state was Bismarck. And do you know how Bismarck called the welfare state? Practical Christianity. How can a conservative oppose that? Can you be against practical Christianity? Of course not. This is why it's either the one or the other. You either stand for your religious values or you stand for freedom. The two cannot go together. So, to sum up, hopefully this news is not doesn't come as a surprise to you, but again, the right is as much a threat to freedom as is the left. And it's only getting worse. So we who care for freedom, we don't need the right. And even more, they don't want us. Again, time and again they tell us, we don't want you. The term neoliberal used to be a smear by the left against anyone who was slightly in favor of capitalism. Do you know who are the people who mainly today use the term neoliberalism as a smear? The Trumpite right. So they don't want you. They consider you the enemy. They consider you part of globalism or of Dr. Fauci's plan of world domination or I don't know what. And it's true that they have a strong opposition, a strong fight with the left. And it's true that it might be tempting to say, look, the left, particularly you in this country, you've experienced socialism. The left is the biggest enemy. Therefore, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But this is not the case. Do you know who else has a strong opposition to each other? The Sunnis and the Shiites. Does this mean that we have a horse on that race? Does it mean that one of the two sides is significantly philosophically different from the other? The answer is no. So both the left and the right are absolutely incapable of appreciating individual rights. They're absolutely incapable of understanding what free speech is and why it's important. And they're absolutely incapable to understand why capitalism is a good system. At best, they say, well, sometimes, okay, if it gives us a higher GDP of 1%, we might tolerate it. But they cannot recognize it for the moral and virtue system that it is. So we do need a new political paradigm. And this paradigm is either going to be based on individual freedom, having as the two pillars on the level of philosophy, reason, and on the level of politics, free market, or it won't be anything at all. Thank you.